Hello and welcome back to a deeper dive with me, Dara Cam. Very excited to have this week's special guest, repeat guest of the show, Steve Bousquet, opinion editor and columnist for the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. We are going to do a lightning round, catching up on the latest in the legislative session as they head towards the exits. Not quite yet. We got a couple weeks left. And talk about Governor Ron DeSantis and what he's up to these days. Also, I'd like to remind our listeners we have a new email address. We love to hear from you, Deeper Divas. Really want to hear your thoughts, what you'd like to hear from us, what your thoughts are, your comments about our special guests. You can message us at our new email address at podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. So that's podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. And you can always tweet me at the Dara Cam if you have any problems with that new email address. So let's jump right in. Welcome back to a deeper dive. Sit back, chill out, get excited, go for a walk, put your AirPods in, and let's get right to it.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida.
Well, I think it's a good thing that the legislature, initiated by Senator Pasadomo, that they put the focus on an issue like this, because there's been so much sideshow, culture war nonsense in Tallahassee the last few years.
Hello and welcome to a deeper dive with me, Dara Cam, and today's special guest is a frequent guest of the show. You all know him and love him, Steve Bousquet, editorial page editor for the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. Welcome back, Steve.
Thanks, Dara. Nice to hear your voice again.
Yeah, we're just going to do a kind of a lightning round. Steve, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And some of the things, we're just going to hit some of the highlights of what happened in Tallahassee this week. House Speaker Paul Renner's main legislative priority, social media bill, banning social media or restricting access to social media for kids, passed yesterday after the Senate made some changes. What do you know about that? What can you tell our listeners about that bill?
Well, I think that the big question is whether the governor is going to sign or veto it. DeSantis has made several statements questioning the legality of it, which I find on one level incredibly ironic, since he's the most sued governor in Florida history by far.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden he's worried about the legal implications of something. It strikes me as odd. Anyway, I think that I was struck by the opposition from the very liberal Democrat Anna Eskamani from Orlando, who basically said how bizarre it is that the Republicans who spent the last few years opposing any deplatforming by social media platforms of people now are doing that to people. There's real concern about exposing kids to all this bad stuff that's out there and the effect that it has on their mental health. But I think that there are concerns about its enforceability and its constitutionality. So
Yeah.
So that stands.
I think what's interesting is what I've heard privately, and I think publicly to a small extent, is that there's a lot of Republicans who, parents especially, and Republican, more libertarians, I guess, who feel like it should be up to the parents, because there's been a lot of talk about parental rights over the past couple of years under Governor DeSantis. So maybe does he see that as possibly, a little running the risk of being accused of being a hypocrite by saying parents should have rights when it comes to their kids' education, and yet those rights stop at the social media door.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think that this is really they're getting into some uncharted territory here in Florida, and so like so much we've seen in the DeSantis era, the passage of the legislation is really the beginning, because then everything moves into the courts and it's litigated.
It's also interesting to see the governor express his concerns about a bill. They made changes to it. The Senate made changes to it. The House, we're recording this on Friday, the House on Thursday accepted those changes. And so the bill is now on its way to the governor. For the governor to come out and criticize at this stage of the game a priority of the speaker, the bill is House Bill 1 for a reason.
Right.
And yet for the legislature to go ahead and pass it, I mean, that sort of, I guess that maybe is a process question or a process observation, but that's kind of what seems almost remarkable, maybe too strong a word, but odd at this point to me.
Right. As you know, I mean, I certainly say this and invite your perspective too, for the benefit of your listeners. The way this town worked for 100 years is basically this framework. We being the legislature, we're not going to pass a bill if the governor is going to veto it. So let's sit down at a conference table and work out our differences, so we get the bill in a form that's acceptable to the plaza level, the governor's office, right?
100%. Right.
That's how it worked. That's how it works for eons. And of course, some stuff still gets vetoed. Some people are bullheaded. Some people stand on principle. Sometimes the governor might change his position. All those things are capable of happening, and those are legitimate things. And so, but in this case, this bill, this particular issue is getting, and it's going to get a lot of national media attention. So they got to get this one right, if they're going to do it.
Yeah, they already did one bill that was blocked targeting big tech and got sued over it, and so that was not a success, and maybe they don't want to I don't know, it's very interesting. And I do know I have friends who are parents of young people, and there is a lot of concern about the harm that can be caused by some of these apps, but parents do have some control over them, so we spent a whole day talking about that, which we will on another episode. Some of the other bills that are passing have made some movement this week. One that I think might be of interest to your readers down in South Florida, the bill that would stop people from unhoused people from sleeping in public. Have you had what?
Yes.
Thought? Yeah. Tell us.
Yeah, well, this is a mess, a really big mess. Now, but it's interesting. The opponents, the Democratic opponents of this bill, basically to make illegal public sleeping or public camping, which is a sort of obtuse way of saying get all homeless people off public property,
right,
and put them in these sort of designated areas. You had a tremendous. This is the most compelling testimony I've heard all session has been on that bill. And if we have a minute to discuss it,
yes, let's do it.
A somewhat related bill, the bill that says local governments can't spend any public money for what are known as community IDs, forms of identification.
That's right.
A very big deal in a place like Broward County that I'm very familiar with. And so, but on the homeless bill, this is the first, in the decades that I've covered this place, I cannot recall ever before the legislature making this kind of a concerted attempt at the state level to approach the issue of homelessness, which is a serious problem and getting worse in almost every urban area and probably some suburban and rural areas in Florida. And they're being criticized because they're not putting up any money, really, as I understand it. They're just telling cities and counties what to do. A place like Fort Lauderdale, which has a serious homeless problem, has been sued, has been in and out of courts for years over their homeless policies. The state is a Johnny-come-lately to this issue. and it's probably not something that lends itself to a one-size-fits-all solution. And you had homeless advocates, including a woman from Orlando who I found compelling, who said, be careful you don't create, breeding grounds for human trafficking and things. That
Right.
these camps could be horrible places.
Right. Like
Yeah.
refugee camps, although less maybe like refugee camps and more like internment camps. It just, the whole idea of how what that would look like what cities and counties could do in order to comply with that. It seems like a administrative and enforcement nightmare. Like, are you just going, are people going to be at risk of being jailed because they can't afford, they're living, they can't afford a car to live in, or, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
where, like, it seems pretty draconian.
It was tragic, but there was almost a comic moment in this debate on Thursday in the Senate when, and by the way, I thought senators, I frequently have written and said, and you've seen it myself, I don't think legislators ask enough tough questions at committee meetings, but they asked a lot of really penetrating good questions on this issue of these homeless camps. And one of the questions was, how are people going to know that these camps, that these supposedly secure, isolation places actually exist? And the answer was, with a straight face, was, well, they can find out about it on the internet. On
Oh,
the internet?
yeah.
Uh, I mean, okay,
Right.
maybe some homeless people have cell phones. Maybe
Right.
a lot of them have cell phones, but they're destitute. They have no assets, no
Right.
nothing. That's
Right.
why they're homeless. So,
Right.
and so it just seems sort of, it conjured up this bizarre image of homeless people walking around Fort Lauderdale clutching their laptop computers, trying to find out where the homeless zone is.
Similar to the migrants at the border trying to use their phones to to use the app to make an appointment to get screened for
Right,
the
for the asylum
for
hearings.
the asylum hearings. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's just sort of the ludicrousness of it is astounding at times. Live healthy. Oh, hello. Welcome to the show, Max.
Hmm.
The Live Healthy, the Senate president's priority, that also passed. It's got a whole lot of money in it for different healthcare. I'm stumbling because this is not my bailiwick, so help me out here if you want to, or
Yeah, well, I think the idea is to expand access to health care. Of course, it doesn't do anything in the way of Medicaid expansion. The Senate president is
right.
strongly opposed to that. I believe this is also the bill that's going to create a new and more streamlined pathways for physicians from foreign countries to be licensed in
That's
the state of
right.
Florida. Yeah.
Yes, more money for medical
Um,
for medical schools, more money for doctors, more money for hospitals to pay doctors. So more money, I think, for student loans for doctors. An
yeah.
attempt to expand the what is expected, or to address what is expected to be a severe healthcare provider shortage in the coming years. Um,
I yeah,
go
I just want to say,
Sure.
from a 30,000-foot view level, I think it's a good thing that the legislature, initiated by Senator Pasadomo, that they put the focus on an issue like this, because there's been so much sideshow, culture war nonsense in Tallahassee the last few years that is not, directly related to the pocketbook challenges that real Floridians face every day. This is a real life situation. Getting access to see a doctor,
Uh,
getting in to see a doctor, getting an appointment to see a doctor. That's real life stuff
you are
for millions
preaching
of
to the
people.
choir here as someone with a chronic illness and
Right.
who has had these injuries I've had. I can tell you, we can do nightmares about the healthcare system for many episodes. Um, the defamation bill, is that something that you've been writing about?
Not much, but I've been following it, and we in the news media got a memo from our attorneys this week, who represent us in lots of First Amendment matters. Um, as you certainly know, we're in court or dealing with people all the time. It's not necessarily a lawsuit, but it's basically trying to extricate records from a government agency. Usually, that's what it is. It's become a major struggle in this state in ways that it wasn't before. But anyway, so yes, this is a bill that has really antagonized and concerned the conservative media community.
Yes.
This was the same issue we had last session.
Yes.
This bill, a more sweeping version of this bill, died last year in large part because of strong, well-organized, cohesive opposition from the conservative media community.
That's right.
Which is, a very powerful voice in the state.
Yes, the Christian Broadcasters Group is publicly opposing the bill this week. I'm not sure what its future holds. Another interesting development I'm doing lightning round here. Another interesting development we saw, I think it was this week, was a House committee released an elections bill that would have reintroduced the primary runoff, and then that bill got TP'd like in a nanosecond after the governor scummed it and as well as other Matt Gaetz, who was allegedly, this was supposed to help him or hurt him. Anyway, it was a bizarre thing to drop this late in the session with just a couple weeks left and then to evaporate. Like, what did you make of that whole, again, process? Because you're really good at process.
Well, it was a trial balloon that deflated very quickly. I will say this: we've talked about it a lot at the Sun Sentinel. I think we're proponents. We are proponents of bringing back the runoff election. I know a lot of people will disagree, and I respect their views. The feeling is the politics of the state have gone so far to the extreme left and right that the runoff forces people of one party or the other or both to somehow coalesce behind a consensus candidate. I understand the whole story. The problem with a runoff is incredibly low turnouts. The runoff was held like 3 or 4 weeks after the first primary. So you had people voting 3 times in the space of 2 months. The runoff election, though, of course, the history of it in Florida, that's what gave us Bob Graham, Reuben Askew, Lawton Childs, a lot of consensus candidates who maybe finished second in the first primary, and they slingshotted their way to the nomination back when Democrats could still get elected statewide in the state.
Right.
So anyway,
I think you're right, though. It does. Yeah. It does help more. I mean, dare I say it, mainstream candidates make it out of what have become very the base voters are on the, you said extreme fringes of the parties now. So they have a lot of control in primary elections.
Yeah. The way it's looking, and I know everything is subject to change and probably will change, but the way it looks now, whatever it is, a little less than 3 years out, it looks like we're going to have the biggest field of Republican candidates for governor that maybe we've ever had.
Yes.
And so in a field like that, without a runoff, the Republican nominee could be somebody who is chosen by, like, I'm going to pick a number, 32% of the Republican electorate.
I would say even less than that. I think it could be less than that. Yeah, I would say it could be in the 20s.
Okay, that's not a consensus of in any way, shape, or form. And so, they're not going to bring the runoff back. But you're right. This is again bad government to spring this on an unsuspecting public in the 7th week of the session, and it's consistent with a pattern, which is monkeying around and making politically motivated changes to the election laws with as little advance public notice as possible. They've done this now. In this case, they're not going to do it because there's not enough support for the bill. But But you know,
They
so
have
it's
done it like in advance of each election cycle for the past 3 cycles, I think.
yeah.
Big bills that make significant changes. We'll be right back with my old pal Steve Bousquet. We have a new email address, and we'd love to hear from you. To reach us and give us your input, tell us what you'd like to hear. Tell us what you thought about what you already heard. Tell us how fabulous we are. Join the Deeper Divas team. Send an email to podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. That's podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. And I promise I will read everyone. We're here again with Steve Bousquet giving us the deep dish on what's going on inside the Capitol. What else are you running? I saw, there's stories now that are coming out almost daily about Governor DeSantis is continuing to run for governor, even though for president, even though he dropped out of the race. He made an appearance in South Carolina this week to promote term limits for congressional term limits. That seemed a little bit bizarre to me. We're doing this thing again now, which he did in the run up to his announcement for president, where he's having several press conferences a day, all around the state. He did one he took a 1-year victory lap about doing away with Disney's special district this week. What are your thoughts about what he's doing?
I really haven't figured it out. I mean, he's as we're talking here on a Friday, he's in Cedar Key.
Right.
Good for him. That's a place a governor almost never visits unless it's a weather emergency. Really beautiful place, of course.
They got hammered.
But he's, again, maybe I'm clinging too much to the old folk ways of Florida politics. But at this point in the session, the governor ought to be traveling around the state, basically urging the legislature to pass his priority bills. Now, the problem with
traveling around the state or around the Capitol or walking the halls of the Capitol building like Jeb Bush used to do.
Sure. I mean, we don't really know what DeSantis's priorities are, because actually this session has been more orderly than I thought it would be, because I've heard from a lot of people early in the session that the legislature is flailing around helplessly because they're waiting for their marching orders from Ron DeSantis, and he hasn't given them any. Well, he hasn't given them any, but they've proceeded, along with their own priorities. There hasn't been. How many sessions have we covered that broke down because the Senate president and House Speaker were at war with each other? We're not seeing that. They might have disagreements, but the petty, breakdowns of years past, we're not seeing. I'm not seeing them.
Right. So you're saying that they're flailing because they don't have that?
No, I'm saying that they're not flailing.
Okay.
You may disagree with their agenda, and I certainly editorially we've strongly disagreed with many of the things they're doing, but it's the public notice and transparency is lacking, as it always is. But I'm just saying they're not openly in political warfare with each other.
It doesn't seem like what he's doing is, these trips that he's making and these appearances he's making, they don't seem focused on legislation or policies that he wants them to pass. So it is, maybe he got some criticism that his folks back among his supporters in Florida, when he was running against Trump for president, we love you as governor. We want you as governor. You've got 3 more years. Come back and do your job. Maybe this is him showing that he's doing his job.
Maybe, yeah, I know, but my sense from a distance is he doesn't like to engage with with legislators. We'll know next week. Next week is week 8. I mean, the last week really is largely, frantic passing legislation that needs revisions down the stretch and doing the budget. I mean, I think really a lot of people who are good students of the political process in Tallahassee know that the 8th week is really crucial, and that's a week then generally when the governor is meeting, all day long with members on their priorities, or their projects, and don't veto this and please don't veto that. And I'm trying, this is an election year when everybody wants to bring something back for their district. In the end of the 7th week in past years, the budget conference process has begun.
Right.
That is people working through the weekend, House and Senate working together, openly, publicly resolving differences on spending, of which in a typical session there are hundreds of those differences. So
I heard yesterday, a lobbyist told me, like, be ready for an extension on the budget. So adding a couple more days to the session for the budget. This is a rumor. Our sophisticated listeners will know this is a rumor that always percolates around this time in the session, right? So I'm not, banking on it, but that rumor is spreading around on whoever little. Have you been in the Capitol at all this week?
Yes, a lot.
It's so crazy. It's like tumbleweeds. There's no one there.
I wanted to bring up this point because you mentioned you said the magic word, lobbyists.
Yes.
I wanted to, first of all, and I'm sure you have, a number of lobbyists in your audience. I know you must.
Oh, yes.
And so, the relationship between lobbyists and the news media, has always been sort of interesting. It's symbiotic. We kind of both need each other a little bit. Yes, reporters write stories that basically denigrate lobbyists for having too much influence. However, lobbyists and news media people their missions are more similar than they are different, because we're both in the information business. And so the stock and trade in Tallahassee during a legislative session is walking the halls and picking up snippets of information on things all day long. And the best reporters have gotten a lot of really good stories just by, whispered conversations in that 10th floor coffee shop or in the basement or wherever.
Yeah.
What's happened is lobbyists have largely stopped going to the Capitol.
Yeah.
They don't need to be there anymore.
They don't.
I've talked to a lot of lobbyists about this session.
Me too.
The answers I get are, we should compare notes here. The answers I get are, first of all, I don't need to be over there because I can text message the people I need to get in touch with and actually get a faster response. Number 2, everything is so tightly scripted and preordained that if a bill is on a calendar or a committee schedule, it's going to pass, period. And so there's a complete lack of suspense to anything the legislature does in Tallahassee. Everything is scripted.
Yes.
And so people have stopped showing up.
Yes. Okay.
So some of this, by the way, some of this is COVID. Some of this changed during COVID and never changed back.
That's true. Okay, so I have to say, I 100% endorse what you just said. I was asking a lobbyist about this yesterday. I was on the 4th floor, and there were, less than 20 lobbyists. A lot of them were just there because they were hanging out, whatever. A couple of legislative aides from different agencies, along with visitors. And I said, like, what is going on? Like, it's a ghost town here. And he pointed to his phone. And he, basically, and he shook it back and forth. He said, "This is how I do. This is how we do business now." He said, "I watch," and the Florida channel is another reason, because everything, let's give another shout out to the Florida channel. They can watch everything from their office. Most of them have offices that are really close, and he also said the same one. And this is a reflection of many conversations I've had this session, that we already know what's going to happen. I think that those were his exact words. We know what's going to happen. So, like to your point, there's no suspense unless you have an amendment. There are still some amendments that they were working on. He said, that's the only reason I'm here. I have an amendment, waiting for a member to come out to discuss the amendment. So it's very rare that there are any last minute changes made to anything, and that it does, I feel like it does affect our ability, maybe not to, because you hear little snippets of things that are going on. You see who, not only that, Steve, but you see who's huddling with whom.
Absolutely.
And
I couldn't agree more. Yep.
that tells you more than even knowing what they're saying, because you know who they represent and which lawmakers they're huddling with. And that's all lost. And you're right. It all started with COVID, and now it's
How many times, ways could I tell this story? But effective lobbyists, I can think of hundreds of people, but effective lobbyists are watching their issues with a tremendous intensity, and they're in the nuances of how some. I'll just give you this illustration. It's very common. A substantive amendment to a bill is in trouble, not because of the policy involved, but because the two people, the two protagonists for and against the bill, hate each other for personal reasons. Has nothing to do with the bill.
Right.
It has something that happened three sessions ago.
Yeah.
And so that kind of stuff happens. Well, we're not going to write about that unless that involves something really, with major statewide implications. And chances are on something like that personal, nobody's going to want to talk on the record about it. So it's going to be hard to really, quantify it in a news story. But my point is that the lobbyists have massive volumes of that kind of information, and it's always been our job to sort of sift through it. Well, this is BS, but this might be important. The other thing you just told me, and so we've all had these experiences. You really can't cover this place without talking to lobbyists.
No.
They have that much access to that much information. I've just I've had that experience many times in my career, and if they're not in the building.
Yeah.
It's kind of defeats the whole purpose of being there a little bit.
I used to get the most information hanging around on the hallway outside the door, the side door that goes into the Senate chamber on the 4th floor, right before you get to where you cross over to go into the Senate office building. You know where I mean?
Right. Yes,
hanging out there, there's that little alcove. Hanging out there and seeing who was hanging out and which senators were coming out and who was talking to whom, and talking to the people that were huddled over there. That was a gold mine of information, and those days are, I think, gone probably forever. Yeah.
It's really, I don't see this as a positive development at all. I talked to a lobbyist this week, and I said, "Why are you still showing up?" And he said, "I'm from the old school. The cliche is you must be present to win." That's what he said. You must be present to win, like at a county fair kind of a thing.
Right. Was it Jack Corey?
No, it wasn't Jack Corey. No.
Sounds like a Jack Corey thing, because I always see him and Keena sitting there watching. They're still there.
I think among some of the older school lobbyists, there's been a bedrock principle of the way they approach their work, which is Chairman so-and-so could do something terrible to one of my clients at any time on any bill without warning,
Yeah.
And so I better be here, because what if the client calls and says, "Hey, that language on House Bill 209, I didn't know about it because I wasn't in the building. I was working from home." What? There's really no defense for a lobbyist who's not on the ground when something bad happens to a client, right?
That's true. That's true. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, is there anything else that you're watching this week?
The only other thing I would say to you is that, we all look for things that haven't gotten maybe the amount of exposure in a news story that maybe they deserve. And mine is the fact that in her final weeks as Senate President, Kathleen Passidomo appears to be putting her foot down and stopping a lot of extreme pieces of legislation. And I'm thinking of several. I'm thinking of the bill that bans pride flags in government buildings, the bill that protects Confederate monuments, the bill that would have banned most voting by mail in Florida, the bill that would have lowered the purchase age for a rifle from 21 back
That's
to
right.
18, the way it was before Parkland. These are all. I'm sure there are many more that I'm not enumerating or can't think of at the moment, but. We've seen a return to the legislature of old, where a presiding officer, and you can argue it's good and both good and bad, but it's a tradition of the Florida legislature. The presiding officer puts his or her foot down and says, "We're not doing this. We're not passing this."
I,
And what that person says is the law. Period. Right?
yeah. I had
I mean, so
heard at the beginning of session that they call her KP, that KP said no culture war issues this year. So I think the only one that is still, and I'm not sure where it is in the Senate, you might know, the one about transgender, the driver's licenses. I don't
yeah, I
know.
think that's still out there. Yep. Yep.
But that has
That's
been
a
changed by rule, so that the Governor DeSantis's administration went ahead and did it anyway. So I'm not sure whether they actually need the legislation or not. It is still
right.
moving in the legislature, but you're right. The other, so-called culture war issues, the Senate president has put the kibosh on.
This is why it matters what part of the state the presiding officer is from. Where's Pasadomo from? Naples, Collier County, strongly, solidly Republican, but I would say not a fertile ground for the extreme right culture war kind of stuff. It
Fiscal
just isn't.
conservatives.
Fiscal conservative, upper middle class,
Mm-hmm.
white, wealthy, prosperous. Keep the size of government small. Don't raise my taxes. But I am certain, for example, I am positive without any research that's an area where you're going to find Republicans who would be supportive of this abortion initiative.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I had
as opposed to, I'm saying this as opposed to, deep in the Panhandle, or maybe Brevard County, or some of the more really conservative parts of the state.
yeah.
So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, Steve
All right.
Bousquet, opinion editor and columnist, South Florida Sun Sentinel. It's always a pleasure having you. Thank you so much, and we'll catch up again soon.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Dara.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Steve. Bye.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs LLC and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.